From Nashville. I'm outside Nashville, Minnesota. All right, Cindy, great. Good to have you here. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. In just a few. So hang in there for just a second. But if there's anybody out there as you join, go ahead and put in the chat where you're from so that we can kind of see you. We can kind of get things warmed up. Just a moment. I'll be right back. All right. Looks like we got a lot of people from all over. We have Scotland, we have Dusseldorf, the UK, Germany, Philadelphia. Welcome, Arizona. Um, can't get much different than all of these different places. This is great. Planet Earth. I like that answer. That's really good. Hey, Sarah. Hey, Karen Deep. How are you all doing?
Very well, thank you.
Good, thanks.
For having us on.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Well, I appreciate you both coming. I am going to get my screen shared real quick, and then we can get started in just a second. Usually someone else is the one sharing the screen, so I'm having a fumble here. Just a minute, but welcome everybody. All right, looks like we have a lot of comments coming in. DC, Sweden. And for those of you who might have seen some of the promotions about Eric Henry coming, I asked him. We were excited to potentially have him, but he actually has to be in DC today. He has a important thing that he's taking care of there, so he was unable to be with us. But if you want to hear something from Eric Henry, please let us know and let us know what you'd love to hear. We'll try to get him in the future. All right. I think we likely have a quorum here, so feel free to continue using that chat. But welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. Again, we're going to let folks trickle in, but we're going to go ahead and get started right now. Welcome to today's webinar, State of the Medical Device Industry in 2025, Quality Challenges, Regulatory Complexity, and Economic Uncertainty. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'll be the moderator for today's session. And just a few housekeeping items before we delve into the presentation. First, I love it when people actively participate. I already asked you to use the chat to tell us where you're from. The chat, in my mind, is ways to communicate with each other, connect with each other, get a feel for who else is here in the audience. And so feel free to do that and continue to do that as we go through this webinar. If you have specific questions, though, that you want us to answer or the presenters to answer, use the Q&A tab. So if you see up at the chat, in the top right, there should be another button that says Q&A. And you can use that to ask questions directly that we'll try to focus on during the question and answer section. That said, even if you don't have a question yourself, if you want to go look at the questions that are there, you can always upvote those or thumbs up those questions. And I always try to address the ones that are most upvoted. So be sure and look at that so we can make sure that we're asking questions that are most relevant to you. Second, we always get this question, so I want to address this at the beginning in case I don't see this come in later. We will be sending out the full recording and presentation slides to all the registrants after the live event, so watch your inbox for that follow-up email in the coming few days. Now, at Greenlight Guru, our mission is to improve the quality of life through our work in the medical device industry, which is likely a shared goal of many of you here today. And that's the reason we host these free webinars, to share valuable insights, to learn from top industry experts, and to showcase our industry-leading software solutions. Our software is designed to help medtech companies bring life-changing products to patients faster, more efficiently, and with less risk. Our software suite includes solutions for product development, which we don't always talk about, but it's my favorite part, quality management and clinical data management, all targeted specifically for the medical device industry. So if you're interested in joining over 1,000 leading medical device companies that trust Greenlight Guru, visit www.greenlight.guru for your personalized demo after today's webinar. Now, to introduce today's co-presenters, Karen Deep and Sarah. Sarah Moeller is a seasoned expert in inspection readiness and clinical compliance with over 20 years of experience across medical devices, pharmaceuticals, IVDs, and biologics. She's led teams through more than 300 regulatory inspections worldwide and is a certified lead auditor, trainer, and CRO oversight specialist, and is president and CEO of the Greenlight Group, a name that I really like. We'll have to talk about that time. Sarah supports companies in navigating FDA, EMA, PMDA, and Health Canada audits with confidence and clarity. She also serves as the USA co-chair for the AMI ISO TC194 Clinical Investigations Working Group 4, helping shape international standards like some you may have heard of, like ISO 14155. Known for her global insight, practical leadership, and deep commitment to patient impact, Sarah is a trusted voice in the evolving medtech landscape. She's also, I'll throw out too, we were chatting a little bit before, she's also, or was an adjunct professor for 10 years, which teaching a graduate program that she co-created. So I think that's definitely worth mentioning.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Karen,
It's a pleasure to be here.
So glad that you're here with us today. Okay, let me introduce you to Karandeep Singh Badwell. He's a globally respected quality and regulatory consultant, helping medical device companies bring products to market across the UK, EU, and the US. He's the founder of QRA Medical, and he's certified ISO 1345 lead auditor and EU MDR practitioner. Karandeep specializes in building and optimizing quality management systems, navigating complex pathways like CE marking, UKCA, FDA 510K, and SAMD compliance. He's also the host of the MedTech podcast, where he spotlights industry leaders shaping the future of healthcare. So definitely check out his podcast as well. He's known for making regulatory strategy approachable and actionable, and Karandeep serves as a judge for MedTech Innovator and regularly mentors startups and professionals entering the MedTech space. So I have tremendous respect for both of these people, and I'm so glad that you're both with us here today. All right.
Thank you very much for having me on, Etienne. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Etienne.
So we have, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. I guess we'll do the three, what we're going to talk about, we'll talk about it, and then we'll talk about what we told you. The thing that I want to look at today is the 2025 Medical Device Industry Report. So if you're not familiar with what this is, let me get to where I can navigate a little bit better. The 2025 Medical Device Report that Greenlight Guru puts together is a survey of, this time, 536 quality, product development, clinical, and leadership professionals in the medical device industry. So we put this together late last year, and we have detailed demographics in the report if you want to look at that a little bit closer. But really, the goal of this was to get an idea of what 2025 has the potential to look like, and what the economic forces will be, and really all of the different things that are going to be impacting the medical device ecosystem. So I encourage those of you listening to, if you haven't already looked at the report, or download the report, and we'll make sure that you have a link so that you can access that a little bit later, but let's get into it. One of the things that stood out to me was that despite the strong growth indicators for 2025, economic uncertainty is really creating a lot of headwinds for a lot of companies. More than 1 in 3 companies says they were halting new hiring for 2025, which is up quite a bit, 5 points from last year. 33% are delaying product development, and even larger companies, because we will, as you see us go through this report, we're going to break it a little bit between commercial and pre-commercial. The larger companies, quite a few of those are likely to say they're halting new hiring. 46% are halting new hiring and reducing headcount. So that's kind of where I'd like to start, just because to me this was an interesting indicator or data point, I guess. But what were your thoughts when you were reading this? And maybe Sarah, we can start with you and see what your thoughts were.
Thank you. I was surprised to see how high that metric was this time, and surprised on one hand because it's high, and not surprised in that my inbox is full of direct messages asking if I'm hiring, if I can get people jobs, do I know of anything? And so there's a real uncertainty for forecasting given the uncertain and constantly pivoting regulatory landscape at this time. I think companies are trying to pivot and manage their risks well. And so putting a pause on some hiring and even decreasing the headcount seems to be the way to go.
Yeah, it was surprising to me, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on some of the impact. I mean, 2024 was quite a year. There were a lot of different things that happened. I mean, we had obviously there's a new administration now, so there was expectation that regardless of what happened there was the trepidation as you go into a new year, and then there's in my mind, when I think about QMSR or the potential for EU MDR changes, all of those things led to a certain amount of uncertainty there. And I guess just an overarching across multiple industries, because I've been trying to keep track of things even outside the medical device industry, is the impact of AI and artificial intelligence and how different people are utilizing that and trying to streamline workflows. What are your thoughts? Karendeep, I don't know if you had any thoughts to add as far as this goes when it comes to some of the different pressures companies are having and slowing some of these things down.
Yeah, so despite favorable growth projections that we see in the medtech industry, economic headwinds are real, and it's important that we recognize that, companies are pausing hiring and delaying innovation. And, especially with the things that are happening right now, especially with the UK, where the UK Prime Minister has said things like, they're going to get rid of the NHS and come up with the new systems. And we saw the recent FDA layoffs, etc. And this is going to cause a lot of a whirlwind in the industry. And I think what's happening with companies, unfortunately, is there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's probably why they're having hiring freezes. The last thing you want to do is go out and hire 4 to 5 people in your regulatory team and then realize that, okay, hold on a minute, our regulatory approvals are not going to go through. Is probably not the best way of going about it. So my view here is we're living in a world right now where there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of things that we have to consider. So again, when I saw these statistics, I'm going to sound slightly controversial here. I wasn't surprised with the amount of uncertainty in the industry and people are not sure with the way things are going. I'm not surprised by these statistics. It makes sense. If you don't really know where the industry is going, the last thing a company is going to do is go out and hire tons of people for this.
Yeah. And, one of the things they taught me as a project manager were the things that you really needed to plan for were the unknown unknowns. So you have known knowns, known unknowns, and then you have unknown unknowns. And those are the things that I think we'd really, I'm hoping we can uncover a few of these things today. So let's kind of move on a little bit deeper.
I was going to say,
please.
I was going to say the other piece that I think is also impacting, to tag on right on what Karendeep mentioned, is it's the tariff question. Also, if you've got parts that you need to build your devices and the tariffs question is uncertain or it changes frequently, that's also another layer of uncertainty that's impacting a lot of companies because they're trying to forecast and do their budgeting.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I appreciate you bringing that up. That's a good point. Okay, if we look at some of the different particular company objectives by market stage, and this is kind of what I was mentioning as far as commercial versus pre-commercial, there are multiple things that are pretty impressive as I look at the differences between these two. So one of the most cited priority was implementing and upgrading quality systems and process, mentioned by 44% of those with products on the market. And there's another, oh, sorry, okay, I was trying to keep track of some of the comments and things just to make sure that you guys can still hear me and everything. The biggest, I guess, disparity, or the two biggest, was the top and the bottom when I look at this: improving data integrity and sharing, and then improving customer satisfaction and brand equity. Those two really surprised me quite a bit, and I might touch on the bottom one a little bit. I want to hear your thoughts first. But Karendeep, what did any of this surprise you, or especially as you look pre-commercial and post-commercial, and the way they approach their customers and the way they approach the market? Was there anything that surprised you or you think is worth highlighting or emphasizing?
Yeah, so Etienne, I'm very glad that you're pointing this out, because it clearly shows how misaligned company priorities can be, unfortunately, in the industry when it comes to pre-commercial and commercial. Is because pre-commercial, everything sounds very promising, but then when you go commercial, that's when you start hitting those roadblocks, whether that's regulatory, whether that's funding, whether that's clinical, etc. That's when companies begin to realize. So I'm going to say again here is kind of like, I'm not too surprised about what I've seen as well. And kind of what it's the data that you have here, startups, they focus on things like clinical trials, approvals, and fundraising, etc. And there's different ideas here that we have. So if I look here right at the statistics as well, is things like implementing and upgrading the quality system processes. You can see that pre-commercial, they try to cut down on this because there's no immediate return on investment. But the moment they realize, our quality system is not in order, it's not going to pass regulations, we're not going to get that 510K, we're not going to get that CE mark until we put something in. You can quite clearly see that once it's commercialized, that they start putting more effort into it as well. So again, the statistics here are showing me is kind of like, at the start, a lot of companies focus on things like marketing. But then when you get to the commercialization stage, they're doing things like quality, regulatory, and all these essential processes. So again, for me, what the data that you found here is not too surprising from my opinion. But again, I may sound slightly biased here as someone who works in quality and regulatory, but then that's my view.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sarah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. And the as we go through the questions and the slides in this thoughtful presentation and summary, I'm seeing the opportunity for doing more planning upfront in order to plan for all the way through your product life cycle. And that's where I think teams are learning to pivot, but it's something that really needs to be involved in the life cycle of the product, is all the way through from R&D all the way through commercialization and into post-market surveillance.
That makes sense. And I appreciate your practical approach to this. And I'm going to make just sidebar real quick. This is more related to the moderation of the webinar itself. Apologies, I can't make this bigger. This is my way of doing a Google presentation. I suppose I should have downloaded this into just a PowerPoint, I suppose. But this is the largest I can make it at the moment. So those of you who are asking about a little bit bigger font or whatever. But to your point, Sarah, I think that's a really good point. Being a little bit more proactive, and this has always been important, but it's even more important when you get into stages of uncertainty. And I actually want to back up a little bit, because the economic pressures that we spoke about, I was actually at LSI last week, which is a Life Sciences Intelligence conference in California, in Dana Point, California. And I actually co-presented with a guy named John Norris, who is he's with HSBC Bank, and they do quite a bit of analytics on the economic side. We're more on the quality regulatory side, obviously. And he was talking about how in 2025, this is going to sound a little doom and gloom, and I don't want to be that way, because I think this is kind of tying back to Sarah's point about being a little bit more proactive. He was saying that a lot of companies are unable to get to that Series B, because if they are at Series A, they are struggling to get Series B, because a milestone, a revenue inflection point where you would obtain more revenue, like Series B, would be something like regulatory approval. And with the uncertainties around the FDA cutbacks and so on, there's a lot of uncertainty and nervousness about meeting those submission timelines. And so as a result, if you don't have enough runway from your Series A to get to Series B, he and I just in a side conversation, the expectation is that there may be some companies who don't make it through 2025. And actually the true concern is that there will be many companies who are smaller and pre-commercial who don't make it. And so these are even more important than ever before, is improving that customer satisfaction. Obviously, if you don't have a product on the market, it makes it a little bit difficult here. But making sure that you are streamlined and ready to go from the get-go, and that you're really solving a genuine problem, is more important than ever. And I'm getting off my soapbox here. I'll stop my TED talk, but and Sarah, Karen, if either of you want to add to that, let me know, or we can move on to the next slide. I know we have a lot to talk about.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I don't have anything to add yet.
Okay. All right. Well, let's keep moving. So one of the things that we felt like as we built this report and as we got on in this data, that as we said, planning for high performance, that's one of the most important things that companies can be doing in 2025. So how can they achieve that operational excellence? We've already touched on this a little bit. And maybe I got a little ahead of myself. Obviously, the regulatory environment, it is more challenging in 2025. And we'll talk about a few data points here. Some of this might not be a surprise to anybody. Some of this may be kind of old hat to some of you, but the FDA QMSR preparedness surprised me how many are still not prepared at all, considering it's less than a year away at this point. I don't know if this, and we'll just run through a few more data points, and then we can kind of get some feedback. EU MDR, it's even more that are not prepared, or a low level preparedness for EU MDR and IVDR. But again, the discrepancy from pre-commercial to commercialized is pretty big. It's pretty large, which I was a little bit surprised by. I would have expected pre-commercial to be a little bit more focused on that, because that is going to be impacting them pretty heavily. And then where do people want to go first? This is an age-old question. And that seems to have shifted over the last 10 years, with currently the United States being the front runner. But I'll open it up to any thoughts, any ideas or ways in which people can really get ready for this. I know, Karendeep, you've got a lot of thoughts on EU MDR versus US first, but so maybe we'll save that. Sarah, do you have any thoughts first?
Thank you. I was going to ask about the previous slide that talked about, are you prepared for MDR, IBDR? And I was wondering, survey respondents, were the people saying they are not prepared for MDR, IBDR, perhaps they're not targeting Europe as a geography in which they want to file a marketing application. So perhaps that is a nuance for this discrepancy in the commercialized versus pre-commercial. I don't know if geography has an impact on that or not. If I'm commercialized in the US, I've got data that I can at least use to try to submit to go get my CE mark. But if I have not planned that, or I'm a small company, maybe I've said.
Well, it's a good question. I'm glad you brought that up, because I neglected to bring that up at the beginning. So the way we built this report, as these questions came up in the report, if you said, are you, before we asked whether you're prepared or not, we would ask, are you pursuing CE mark or EU MDR? What are the markets where you plan, either are currently commercialized or are planning to commercialize? And we would, if they were not planning or were not commercializing in the EU, we took these parts off. So this should be, this should be indicative of people who are either are or planning to market in the EU. Yeah, great point. Anything to add, or pass it over to Karendeep? I'll let you say, Sarah.
I would pass it over to Karendeep, but MDR is complicated. We're struggling in our standards writing committees as well for ISO 14155 and ISO 18969, which is clinical evaluation. We constantly have to go back to MDR and make sure we're not in conflict with our terminology, with our guidance, with our companies continue to try to push back on MDR because of the, I think, good intentions, but the prescriptiveness of MDR is really causing us some challenges.
Yeah, I very much agree with you on that one, Sarah. It's kind of like, the EU MDR tells you that you have to be compliant to something, and the standards kind of tell you the best practices to go around doing it. So it's very important that the language is aligned. And the only issue that we have in comparison to the US and the EU MDR, not Etienne, we've talked about this offline, is in the EU, we have so many different languages. Again, don't get me wrong, that's amazing, having so many different cultures and languages. But when it comes to a legal perspective, what makes sense in German when it's translated back into French or Spanish or any of the other European languages can completely change the meaning, as anyone has ever worked in translation before. Is what means one thing in one language can be something completely different in another language. And that's the issue when it comes to EU MDRs. When you're working across different jurisdictions, where in one language it may say something like you should do this, and in another language it may say something like you must do this. And then should and must are two different words. So these are two different things, of course, we need to understand as well. And then Etienne, going back to your original question as well, US or EU first, is my view here is don't go for the easiest market. Don't go for the market where you think you're going to make the most money. Go to the market where you feel as though your product is going to have the most impact. Whatever condition you're trying to target, or if there's a gap in the market, or there's people that you're trying to help, go to the jurisdiction of where you feel as though your device is going to have the most impact or make the most difference. That is what companies need to do, rather than just think, hey, let's go to the US first because it's easier. Okay, great. You've gone for your 510K, and you can go into the more database. You can look at 510Ks of products that are out on the market, but regulatory approval doesn't mean that people are going to buy your product. It just means that the FDA have accepted what you have and your documentation is in order. But that doesn't mean you're going to make sales. So a lot of companies need to get at this mindset that regulatory approval doesn't mean automatic sales on the market.
Yeah,
I agree. And to tag on to that,
I love the idea. Go ahead, Sarah.
Sorry about there's a little delay on my mind today. I'm sorry. I was going to say the planning for, especially in the US, in our healthcare system, the reimbursement strategy has got to be at the forefront of everything you do. If you don't have a space for where your product development is, you're still going to be stuck. And so that bringing in your reimbursement experts early on in your product development life cycle is really essential.
100%. And I guess the phrase that goes through in my mind is market approval isn't market adoption. And I think that's my layman's terms of what Karen Deep says. So it's a really good point that you make. One other thing I'll mention, and I don't want to take the words, I don't want to misquote him, but if you read the report, there should be a quote somewhere around here, because Eric Henry, I actually presented to him and asked him this, so I'm not going to just use his words just because he's not here, but I can't take credit for it. He mentioned when we were comparing QMSR, or when he was looking at this, he said one of the things to think about is that the EU MDR has had multiple timeline extensions. QMSR is not likely to have that. The FDA, you shouldn't expect FDA to push that deadline beyond whatever it is now. So Rashid actually had a good point in the comments about whether or not, could it be that the reason some of these companies are not QMSR, were prepared for QMSR because they're already ISO 13485 certified, and really the effort to get ready is not much, and it's a on-off switch. It's kind of a that stage gate in February of 2026 is you move from QSR to QMSR. I don't know what the reason per se is. That's a good point. That maybe companies are just saying, it's not a big deal. We'll save it till the very end, or maybe we'll save it till QSIT comes out. But those are good thoughts. So just thought I'd throw that out there. Okay. Feel free to interrupt me at any point, guys. And also, I will say we need to kind of pay attention to the Q&A. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. This is, to me, I'm approaching this like I have so much to talk to Sarah and Karen Deep about. And those of you listening, I really appreciate your patience with me, because sometimes I'm following my own curiosity here. So feel free to go ahead and throw in the chat if there are certain specific questions you want us asked. When I looked at the preparedness gaps from this survey, there were quite a few that stood out to me. Obviously, the biggest discrepancy, or the biggest delta between pre-commercial and commercialized, is this FDA inspection readiness. And part of that, in my mind, may be that a commercial company they should be experienced to a certain degree. And a lot of times, if you're pre-commercial, maybe this is relatively new to you. The other side of this is even 73% of a commercial company, that seems low compared to what it should be. And I don't know if it has something to do with the potential changes in the future for QSIT, but I wonder if this is something you've seen. Is it true that 27% are not ready for an FDA inspection? If this is assuming these people are already on the market with an FDA cleared product, cleared or approved product. Either want to comment on that?
Go ahead, Karen Deep.
Yeah, definitely. So it's kind of, yep, sorry, thank you very much for that, Sarah. So it's kind of like, people need to realize the difference between an audit and an inspection. An audit is what happens in the UK and the EU, and inspection is what happens with the FDA. Whereas with the EU, you're working directly with notified bodies, or if you're in the UK, working with approved bodies. But with the FDA, you're dealing directly with the government. That's the way that it needs to be seen. So again, what it comes down to FDA inspection readiness with a lot of companies is a lot of them have never had one. They've never known the kind of questions that happens in these kind of inspections. So how do you know that you're ready for this? So of course, the best way around it is, of course, have consultants or have people like, ex-FDA investigators bring that in. But a lot of companies don't do that. So when the FDA knocks on the door, it's not necessarily that they're not prepared. They just don't really know the questions that are going to be thrown at them. So they don't have the documentation ready. They don't have the records ready. They may not necessarily have the right people ready for that one. So I think that's what it is. A lot of companies just so fail to realize effectively what this sort of thing involves. So I don't think here the statistics are alarming. It's just a lot of companies don't know. And until you've actually gone out and done something, you don't really know how to go about it as well. And that's what a lot of companies, I think, need to work on. So we're looking at other things like statistics here as well, SOP updates as well. What do a lot of companies do out there, unfortunately? They wait until something goes wrong with one of their processes and then updates the SOP. But why not be proactive and think, we never thought of this, or maybe do a preventive action out there where you've seen a model of failure within your company and update the SOPs. But no, what a lot of companies do is they wait until there's an inspection finding or an 483 from the FDA or a minor or major finding from an EU notified body, and then go out and make the SOP changes. But a lot of companies don't want to put the preventive actions in place and actually preempt these sort of things and then make the updates anyway. A lot of companies are taking the reactive approach. So I think that's what the issue here is within the industries. Companies wait till things go wrong and then make the changes. rather than try to predict where things can potentially go wrong and then just make the changes anyway.
Yeah, I'll jump on there too. That's fantastic as a summary too. And specifically for clinical, I'm finding success with the clients where we don't wait till the end of the trial to do a mock inspection. We do the training for a mock inspection at the beginning of the trial, because that helps our team members know, here's what's going to be expected of me. I need to think about how I'm going to document these decisions, this transition of personnel, these deviations in their coding, the transfer of the trial master file. I need to be able to get credit for the good work I'm doing, is what I tell my teams all the time. If they don't know what's going to be required at the end, and you exhaust them from the middle to the end of why not teach and build that excellence from the start to say, we anticipate we're going to be inspected. Here are the kinds of things FDA is going to ask. And do that with each of your teams at your kickoff, and build that into, as you review your SOPs, as you go through each stage of your trial, and as you build your clinical evidence, your clinical evaluation documents, your malfunctions, your risks. Make sure you don't wait to the end of your trial to code your deviations or trend them, or look at your data outliers or your manufacturing outliers. We really need our leadership to see quality and assurance as not a cost eater and an impedance or an obstruction. We need to see leadership say, quality is important to us. It really is important, and this is we're all part of something excellent. Let's help each other. Let's take care of each other as the requirements are at the beginning, even though we're running 80,000 miles an hour or kilometers per hour, sorry, Europe. So really to have the requirements mapped out and have the expectations laid out in the beginning, right? We want people to know, here's what you're going to be asked. So why not know that ahead of time so your documentation can.
I think those are great points. And as I'm looking at this, I mean, on the right side of the graph here, we have the clinical evidence requirements for EU MDR focusing. We look at the EMDR things that people said they were unprepared for. Clinical evidence, which you were talking about at the beginning there, keeping up with QMS requirements. A lot of, in my mind, when I think about the difficulties with each of these, is traceability. And it goes back to inspection readiness. If you can maintain traceability from your original product requirements documents to the SOPs, to the protocols and reports, that's one of the biggest difficulties. Maintaining traceability from risk management to your design controls and your DHF and so forth. Clinical evidence requirements across multiple sites, and actually maintaining revision control and all those things. I'm going to selfishly just say, when I was working on some of these things on paper versus what I see companies do now with Greenlight Guru and the software solutions we have, our goal is really to improve the quality of your life and make this easier. So I'll stop there, but I will do a subtle plug there, because some of the difficulties I see can be fixed with certain tools that are out there. So. But anything else to add on any of these different aspects from this graph or this slide?
I think the one sentence I will leave the audience with here is, prevention is better than cure when it comes to this game.
Yeah, I think that's good. Okay, well, let's look at some of the, I don't want it all to be doom and gloom. So we're going to try to talk about some things at the end as far as some practical application. But what are some of the uphill battles that medical device startups and earlier stage companies will have? We'll still compare commercial versus pre-commercial, so we're not just leaving them behind. But one of the things that I wanted to point out, because I think this is an educational moment for a lot of earlier stage companies, is the number of remediation activities that they grow as they mature. So pre-commercial, we talk about 17 hours a month for a pre-commercial company working on remedial activities. And that might be CAPAs, that might be the documentation or fixing documentation, changing things. That jumps up to 51.4 hours on average for commercialized companies. So getting it right earlier can really save a lot of time in the end. Any thoughts though about this? Anything stand out in this slide to you all?
Thoughts. I'm not surprised. The CAPA, it takes up so much of our time these days, and I do think that in general, some of it comes back to not understanding or taking the time to plan mindfully what is required so that I can avoid having a CAPA later on. You talked about on what date, why did you change it, what was the rationale, show me who changed it, show me the timing, show me the impact, loop that back into my risk analysis, but don't just put metrics in place that are going to make you look good to your management. Truly have metrics that identify this is the riskiest part of our trial. This is the riskiest part of our product development. Let's build actual metrics and not be afraid to have CAPAs, not be afraid to have metrics, and really look at the true story of what's going on with our product and our development.
Great point. Great point. Karendeep, did you have anything?
Yeah, so I very much aligned what Sarah is saying here. Effectively, it's post-commercialization, like what I was saying earlier, companies then begin to realize the amount of issues that should be happening here. But then my view here is kind of, this is where companies are failing, like I was saying earlier, is they're taking very much the reactive approach rather than the proactive approach. You know, it's much more, basically, it takes a lot less resources and cost of money, with less people, capital, etc., to have a proactive approach and put preventive measures in. But the only issue here with companies is there's no immediate return on investment in having a preventive action. You know, if something goes wrong, yes, of course, it's hands on deck and you want to correct it immediately. But then this is the issue that a lot of companies are facing. They think, you know, why spend 5 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours, etc., in a preventive action for something that may or may not go wrong? You know, it may be the case that this thing never goes wrong, but if something goes wrong, it's at that point, it's completely hands on deck. And especially when it comes down to the number of employees as well, companies really underestimate the amount of employees needed to actually run a successful medical device company. You know, you can't just have one person in QARA, you can't just have one person in clinical, etc. These things are the team efforts. And also there needs to be a lot of things where all the teams need to get together on a line. This is where a lot of medtech companies make the mistake, is they make things into departments where quality is just a department. Quality is not a department. Quality is a culture. Yeah. Everyone has a bit of quality about them, regardless of the department that they're in. And that's where companies are making the mistake, is they're just putting things into different departments and thinking, oh, if such and such issues happen, it's that department's issue. But really, there needs to be more of a collaborative approach. And that's where a lot of medtech companies fail to realize that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. That's a great point, Karendeep.
You know, I'm gonna just grab my soapbox for just a second real quick, because a lot of times we talk to medical device companies, and I try to get that out of my head, because we are in a P2P company, or a P2P business, which is people to people, really. And if we talk to somebody, we need to talk to the person themselves. And when I think about what Karendeep just said, which is I 100% agree, I was having a conversation with some earlier, more junior employees, I suppose, of different companies a few weeks ago. And we were talking about how so much you become so much more valuable when you start opening your mouth and not just trying to just make things look good, because Sarah mentioned not just trying to paint a pretty picture to management, but being a true thermostat, or I guess thermometer in this situation, and also being a thermostat, making those changes yourself. So to Karendeep's point, quality isn't just one person's. It's when you can actually adopt that to yourself as a culture. And one last thing that I want to say about that is, sometimes we preach to the choir with quality and regulatory people, and we don't really communicate how to make those culture shifts. And one of the things that I think we can do for our organizations is show them how that quality culture can be communicated. And one of the things you can do is by communicating those problems early and more effectively, and then making the suggestions as to what direction we should go. But I know that's kind of a messy spaghetti against the wall, but love to hear any thoughts if you have any add, or to make that a little bit make more sense.
I thought it made sense. Yeah,
all right,
thank you.
All right.
Good insight. Good
And
insight.
I don't mean to ignore some of the Q&A. We have quite a few questions coming in. I'll get those in just a second. Let's just run through a few more things, make sure we get a few more of these benchmarks. And at the end, I will put a link in the comments so that you can go check out this report yourself if you haven't already. Let's look at a few more benchmarks here. One of the things that I thought was interesting was the difference in pre-commercial versus commercial and how long they kind of thought it would take for their medical device to get to market. And we have class 1, class 2, class 3, which is always interesting if you ask me. And on average, in previous years, class 2 took about 7.6 years to get to market, and a class 3 took about 9.4 years to get to market, which seems, I mean, it seems closer than you would think. I will throw one other thing out there because of the conversation earlier about approval versus adoption. When you talk to a VC investor or someone along those lines, someone who's more on the economic side, they actually bump out that class 2 commercialized exit strategy much closer to a class 3, more along the lines of 8.5 years for a class 2 and about 9.5 years for an exit on a class 3. And the reason for that is usually there is an additional commercial injection of capital. Let me say that in simpler words. Usually a class 2 is not going to be acquired until after it's commercialized, after it's selling product, whereas a class 3 might be acquired by a strategic right prior to commercialization. So that's for that reason they can kind of almost be a little bit neck and neck or within 1.5 years to each other from an average side. That's the actual acquisition side. So we're looking at the approval side. So I'm just going to kind of open this up. Any thoughts or comments on what you saw with the product development slides, Karen Deep or Sarah?
Yeah, so my view here
I was going to say
go
that.
ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, please. I'll be very quick. I was just going to say, and apologies again for the delay on my connection here, for the delay. I was just going to comment. I will be so curious to see these statistics again in a year, to see how the changing regulatory landscape and the tariffs impact this as well. Because this is a really helpful snapshot, and I'm curious to see how this continues to evolve. And perhaps a survey, I don't know, halfway through the year might be interesting to keep close eyes on this.
Yep. So my view here, of course, Sarah, is I very much align with you on this. Companies often underestimate realistic timelines. And I think the ones that mistake it are the people that are new to this industry. You know, when you have people that work in different industries, consumer electronics, etc., you can be on the market in months, if not weeks. But the moment you step into the medtech space, things can take years, and that's where a lot of companies often make the mistakes as well. And particularly those that are funded by VCs. When you have VCs that work in multiple different industries, they're used to being on the market in short timescales. But when they're investing in medtech, they don't realize the amount of time that these things can actually take as well. So just like Sarah says as well, it'd be very interesting to see companies questioned at the start of their journey and then questioned later on in their journey. And you'll probably see a big gap in terms of estimations where they were quite hopeful, thinking that things will happen a lot quicker than they should happen. But the moment they're actually hit the market and they get to that point, they're going to realize that these things can take years. So my view here is 3 to 5 years. It seems like a reasonable timeline. If you think you can do it in under a year, unless you're self-certified or you're a veteran in this industry, I think that's extremely unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right, and I've seen that quite a bit. So I do agree. I think 3 to 5 years is totally doable with a class 2. And all of these are interesting. To me, what's interesting the most is just the difference in perception, I suppose. When it comes to building out those timelines, accurately predicting your product's development timeline is pretty crucial for managing the costs and maintaining that competitive edge. So when you have that, especially that Series A to Series B valley of death on a pre-commercial company, getting those timelines right is pretty important. So I think that's important just kind of to point out. Nitish, if I'm saying your name correctly, asked a really good question, and I want to get to that. Maybe we can weave this into some of our conversation here, but about how can companies, specifically medtech companies, try to help that medical device talent survive these worst case employment scenarios instead of losing that medtech talent to other industries like aerospace, automobiles, especially, et cetera. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if you want to go on, we can kind of think about it. But I really like that question, and I want to propose that to you both. Sarah, do you want to? I'll call you out first. See if you want to start.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to what you both just said. It's I'm still gathering information from my teams. It depends if it's a small team that has a investment from a big company, and so they have different pushes and different funding, or if it's a larger team that's established and has all their SOPs and processes and cross-functional teams ready to go and the adequate resources. So it really depends on team size, product complexity. Site selection is really big, but I tend to agree with these.
Yeah, let's jump forward a little bit, and we'll kind of talk about some of these, and then we'll get to some more questions, because I know we are kind of. I definitely want to save some time for the questions. So, and I should have cut out more, but all of this is interesting to me. I can't help it, guys. So. Those of you listening, when you get to look at the actual report, I'd love it if you reach out to me on LinkedIn or however you want to, and ask me some specific questions. Maybe we can. I think we can use. There's a lot of information here we can do in the future on content, both for blogs and webinars. So, all right. So these are some of the metrics that we found they are prioritizing right now, which I think justifiably so. Submission timelines is one of the highest. Audit readiness, especially for a commercial company, is incredibly high. Then you have CAPA effectiveness. One of the things that I thought was interesting is the discrepancy between that pre-commercial and that commercial, again, for that CAPA effectiveness. Training effectiveness is another one that doesn't seem to be prioritized quite as high as the others, which is understandable. If you have to rank things, things are starting to, they have to go down a little bit as far as that goes. It doesn't mean it's not important. It's just a relevant or a relative thinking here, but still, some of these things are things that, if you look at historical data from the FDA as to what are the top 3 reasons a 483 happens? Well, most of us know that CAPA is up there, supplier or complaints and design controls and risk management. These are top 3 reasons people get 483. So CAPA not being high early on from pre-commercial is concerning to me. But were there any concerns or thoughts that, or a piece of advice you might have for companies as they're prioritizing different aspects of the company? And Karen, do you want to kind of lead the charge here?
Sure. I think when it comes to CAPA effectiveness, it's often when anyone who works in quality for a while will see unrealistic quality metrics, where what a lot of companies do is they think the quicker they close out a CAPA, the better when it comes to metrics, which on paper sounds fantastic. But when it comes down to CAPAs, it really depends on the problem. If it's just something like just fixing a workflow, that's a 5-minute fix. But let's just say something like a software bug that turns up once every 2 months. Surely you want to keep that CAPA open for a few months to make sure that you got rid of that issue. But then this is what I find what a lot of companies are doing is just maybe to impress managers or look good on the metrics, is they're just trying to close CAPAs as quickly as possible. So the effectiveness checks are not really there. And a lot of companies is kind of, they put a fix in there, but not really validating that fix is fixing the problem. Have you patched the problem, or have you actually gone down to the root cause? So again, I feel as though with CAPAs is the root cause analysis is often rushed, but I feel as though the root cause analysis is the space of which you should be spending a lot of time on, because if you don't fix the root cause, eventually it's just going to keep coming back. And looking at the other metrics here, it seems that pre-commercial and commercialized are very much aligned, but Etienne, as you've touched on, is CAPA effectiveness is one that stands out as well. And also training effectiveness. What do most companies do? Reason and understand. You give them an SOP and they say, yes, I've read it, I've understood it. I guarantee you most of these people have not read that SOP. They've quickly flicked through it and they've just checked it out saying, oh, I've got some training to do, and that's it. But real training effectiveness is giving that person the SOP and seeing if they can work to it, give them a simulated scenario. And I think that's where a lot of companies don't realize that. But when you're pre-commercial, it doesn't really matter, right? As long as everyone's trained on paper and you've got the record for it, that's fine. But when you get to the commercialization stages, that's where it becomes a bit more apparent. Like, okay, people have read the procedure, but they don't really know how to work to it properly. And these things become apparent in the FDA inspections and audits.
Yeah, great points. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, outstanding points. I agree. And to layer on to that, one of the metrics I would think needs to be more prioritized. There are two of them. One is your vendor oversight, especially if you have a CRO for your clinical trials. Often, especially if you're a little company, you sign on with a big CRO, you get the JV team managing your trial because you're a small company. You're not a big revenue generator. You're not one of the big pharma, big device companies. So we really need to understand, what does CRO oversight mean? We've got it released in the pharma guidance, ICH GCP E6. We've got it coming in the new ISO 14155 with more CRO oversight. But your vendors, your data management, your monitoring, your deviation, your safety management, those teams need to have oversight and true oversight, not just here's some meeting minutes. And I also agree with the, back in the day, when I started, we didn't have SOPs. We didn't have SOPs. So suddenly now we've got, I've got to train on 45 SOPs with every new client I join on and help to manage some projects. And you get SOP fatigue. But I also don't have time, honestly, to do a quiz or a and I would love to have a simulation, a quiz, or a test for each one, but I don't have time for that either. So sometimes it's just as you were saying, is it a lunch and learn on a topic twice a month where we sit and talk about one of our key risks or the deviation trend that popped up on one trial? Let's look at it across all trials. Early on, don't wait to the end of your trial. Dig in and look at the root causes, not just for the CAPAs, but for your clinical trial deviations. Let's say your biocompatibility testing deviations. Are you tracking to your phase deliverables on time? So having metrics that are meaningful about, we know things will be imperfect, but we need to have the honest and authentic conversations together and not point to some person failed, but our process is failing. We need to Kaizen it and say, stop, wait, we've got deviations. This could impact our trial data. This could impact our sample size. This could impact our time to last patient, last visit. So not just the clinical investigation progress, show me your enrollment, show me your site initiation. I want to talk about deviations. I want to talk about data management. I want to know that my eligibility is being managed appropriately so I don't have to enroll 60 more patients at the end of my study. I want to know that I'm not having 6 different monitors at each of my sites, which interpret the compliance 6 different ways to Sunday, which frustrate my sites, which make them not want to be part of my trial. I want to have oversight that's appropriate. And I want to have the requirements and the expectations outlined ahead of time, but checked in on in a meaningful way as we go along. So yes, we need SOPs, but what I teach teams is, just like a great point about SIVs on LinkedIn today was saying, do we really need these big slide decks and these big meetings? Yeah, we need the reference materials to go back and teach, but what I really want to do is I don't want to teach you to memorize the regulations. I want you to be able to go back to your SOP and see what the requirements are. But I want in your head, I want you to know how to think through a situation, understand the ethics for safety and data integrity as we go along, understand the impact of your device, feedback from your customers, which are your clinical sites during a clinical trial, commercial once it's commercial. And don't be afraid of the bad feedback. Some of our strongest champions are the ones that hate our products, that hate our company, and they want the competitor, and they tell us how great they are. That's the best feedback that I could gather, because it tells me, aha, they're telling me the truth. They care enough to tell me the truth. That's what I really want to hear. And we need to have quality cultures that make it that way with our clinical teams and our R&D teams as well. We've got to be able to handle and welcome telling the truth. Really telling the truth is because it helps us be better. So it's supplier performance. It is CAPA effectiveness. I totally agree. How many times just close the CAPA? What's the aging of the CAPA? No, we've got to do a thoughtful root cause analysis, and it can't just be human error and training and sign this training document. We really need to get into the systems. But audit readiness also. Are the documents required for each phase? Are they kept up to date? Are we tracking that? Do we have metrics on that? And if we are gathering documents, are they accurate and complete and the right versions? Is the product testing performance documentation, does it have traceability, and are those records complete as well? So it's much more than just, you know, the old cliche metrics targets of enrollment and closure to the trial. It's the quality of your data integrity, and your data protections as you transfer data. And then the integration of how many different software systems are teams using. I had one team using 19 different softwares that, as the auditor, I had to go in and say, all right, show me the validation of your integration. Let's go through it. Let's see the screenshots. Let's see the evidence. Let's see the testing. Let's see the configuration. Let's see the access controls. Let's see if your data was corrupt in this transfer. Okay, now let's look at this transfer, until we finally figured out which of the 19 transfers impacted that data integrity.
Wow, that's I can't even imagine that 19. That's impressive. The other thing you said, the 45 SOPs. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's ancient tradition in the medical device industry to break the spirit of a new hire with 45 SOPs on their first day. I can remember many days like that. So, but
yes,
yeah, all those things great points. Yeah. All right, well, let's fly through a few different slides, because I know I'm going to spend too much time if I'm not careful. So we talked about traceability early on. We looked at pre-commercial versus commercial and how they are the confidence levels in being able to demonstrate those. Again, pre-commercial should be one of your more confident areas in my mind, because you're just starting. There's no reason for this not to be a confident area or a confidence area. So whatever the reason here, this is something that I think we should, I don't know, benchmark yourself against and see if you can do better. And I'll let you guys comment on this as well, but I'm just going to go through a few more slides. I have about 7 more, but we can always come back to any of these if we have specific questions. So if we talk about the more mature companies, the ones that have already launched products, they're going to face different challenges. So let's talk about some of the things that they're going to be facing. One of the things that they may experience is a warning letter, obviously post 483. We talked about, we asked how long from those, again, because you asked about how the data is crunched and how we look at this. This question was only posed to those who have actually had a warning letter in the past 10 years, I believe it was, and how long it took for them to resolve that warning letter. So about half were able to do it in less than a year. But if you look at the ones that were over 5 years, 10% over 5 years, that starts adding up. I see dollar signs when I see that many years of doing anything that's not, I guess, productivity related, if that makes sense. So something to think about as far as that goes. I want to get to Jacqueline's question in just a moment here, though, the question about how we can get leadership buy-in to help foster the quality culture. I think that's a really important question. But I want to ask this question too. So when we look at, again, this is more the area of a medical device company that is my passion, design controls. Documenting work is the toughest part of the design control task, according to this question. Now, obviously, if you ask engineers, they're going to talk about the actual engineering of the product and so on. But documenting that work is one of the things that most new product development engineers do not like to do. In fact, to answer the question earlier about how can we keep medical device professionals from leaving this industry to go to aerospace, to go to the other industries that may, maybe they pay much better and they allow them to do a little bit more just pure engineering, because that's what real engineers or true engineers want to do. They want to do that engineering. Design controls is not their favorite. And so when I was a project manager for a drug delivery combination product in the product development department, I saw this. I saw attrition to other industries due to the documentation work. And this is one of the most painful parts. What are some things that we can do in your mind to alleviate this pain? And I'll kind of look to you first, Karen Deep, I guess, because I think, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so definitely what it comes down to, it's, there's a lot of industries in which there's a lot of crossover, like you mentioned, things like aerospace, heavily regulated space as well, finance, etc. But design controls, I can say, is one of the most painful things that a company can go through, because it's borderline subjective, whereas you can go to the complete nth term and spend tons and tons of time on design controls, but then your changes will be taking tons of time to actually be implemented, or you can go all the way down to the other end and basically do the minimal amount. But I think what's happened with a lot of companies, especially from a QMS perspective, is they implement the QMS at a later stage. And then what's happening is they're trying to do design controls in retrospective. Trying to do design controls in retrospective is near enough impossible. And that's where companies do this. You know, for example, let's just say you're on version 15 of your product and now you've just implemented your QMS. You've now got 15 versions of your product where you don't know what exact changes were made. You don't know why the changes are made. You don't know who made the changes. And especially if you're working in a startup company where people are constantly changing jobs and it's quite fast moving, how exactly do you go back in time and try to trace these things? So then what I say to companies is, even if you don't have a QMS in place, is maybe have a partial QMS in place. And when you're in the startup stages, so at least then you've got some form of documented records where you can go back in time and see why things were done, by who, where, etc.
Yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that one of the things that has been most successful with especially my smaller clients is take the time to put together a proper, adequate, comprehensive guidance template. If you need a report, here's what needs to be in it. Here are the questions you need to ask. If we're having teams, working at Mach 10 to try to get a product out the door, I get it. I feel your pain, but especially if you're a smaller resource team, just tell me what you want me to have there and I will do it. Oh, you need me to initial this so you know who did it? Great. Let's add a field for initials. So if we don't have proper, guidance and templates for people to document each of these pieces, including approvals, including change management, including traceability, including the pieces of evidence from the design history file, the clinical trial, whatever it is. If we don't have proper guidance that tells people what to document, when I come in later and do mock inspections, now we're doing remediation activities under duress as we're trying to do the submission and get ready for inspection. So take time in the planning and the setup of your documentation to truly understand what is required for what we're trying to accomplish, and have that cross-functional team sit down in a day or two kickoff meeting to map that stuff out and have agreements and appropriate milestones, appropriate metrics, and get that buy-in. People try to cut that off and say, no, we can just do it virtually, it's fine. That in-person meeting and that bonding of that team, I think is a lost art that we used to do all the time. And I do think that human connection builds trust, and people can ask the hard questions and they don't feel stupid. They feel like they can trust their team members. That kind of collaboration cross-functionally as we are on these project teams, it helps us share information and not be siloed. So I would encourage more of that.
I think that's a great point. There's lots of different ways to do this. When I managed design controls back in the day, it was through Excel. There was a one point of contact, and other people, you weren't supposed to touch it. There's more modern ways to do that. I mean, if you've not seen Greenlight Guru's design controls and risk management and the way it's able to be a collaborative tool, freezing part of the design versus the entire user needs design controls, but doing kind of a modular approach, it can really make the product development a little bit smoother and a little bit easier. So feel free. I'm happy to talk about that if someone wants to reach out. But moving on from that, though, I think all of your points are really good. That collaboration is so important, especially in the design controls section. All right, I'm going to run through the rest of the slides so we can just go straight to Q&A. Managing the supply chain was a big part of what we talked about. Not very many considered themselves to be excellent when it came to the supplier management program, and this is consistent with my dealings with the industry. Really, any industry that doesn't have high volume post-pandemic, this is something we're still working towards. And if there are thoughts, we can talk about that as far as how to improve this. But I also want to mention just the technology advantage, why adopting some of the purpose-built tools for the medical device industry that are out there really make life a little bit easier and a little bit smoother. So the general purpose tools are still dominating the industry. And when I say general purpose tools, I'm talking about Excel for one thing, or just using those, or a paper-based approach versus, for example, with clinical data, an EDC. So you can look at this and just see kind of the the difference. There are general purpose tools out there that can be made to work, and those are helping some companies. But what we found in our just in our research, just in asking, okay, if you're using this tool versus using this tool, how do you rate yourself when it comes to supplier management, for example, or your design controls process? Consistently, the ones that were specific to the industry that they were in seemed to be doing a much better job, or at least they were much more confident. They felt a lot more certain in what they were doing. I don't know if this is something you all have seen, Sarah or Karendeep. That was my last slide. So we can talk about that, or we can go straight to Q&A. We have quite a few questions. So thoughts?
Yeah, so talking about this slide,
I'm okay with. I think that's very helpful.
Q&A. Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
No, please. I was going to say, Karendeep, if you have anything, please jump in.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are taking the minimalist approach, where they're doing the paper-based approach, where just thinking about, what I call it paper-based anymore, I call it e-paper. So they're using things like SharePoint, G Drive, etc. But it is still more or less what would be called a paper-based approach with a digital element to it. So again, with a lot of companies, is what they're doing effectively is they're trying to keep the QMS minimal, which is understandable at the start. But then, like I was mentioning earlier, when things like design controls, CAPAs, etc., if you don't have robust processes in place from the start, these things then trickle on. It's almost like a domino effect, and these problems become bigger and bigger and bigger, and it requires more resources at the end to actually fix them than if you've actually done it properly from the start.
Great point. And Ryan kind of had a good point about asking whether this was pre-commercial and commercial data. So I need to look at the full report to determine that, but that may be worth looking at. In fact, I'm going to just go ahead and add, let's see, just a link to the report if someone wants to look at that. Okay, so the Q&A, we have a few minutes left. I'm going to go ahead and pose a few questions here. So Diana actually asked, do you have any practical tips for QA/RA employees to survive this economy? We were talking about this early on in the presentation. There are lots of uncertainties going on, and one of the first slides we showed was the restriction or the constriction of hiring in 2025. So any thoughts or practical tips for these employees to really thrive in this economy? Sarah, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's tricky. I get this question probably, I don't know, 10, 15 times a week on especially LinkedIn DMs. A lot of people think, oh, I'll be a consultant, and you could, but there's a flood of consultants on the market right now, and many of them have many years of consulting that you might not. One of the things I find helpful if you're in QA/RA, get certified as a lead auditor, or get certified, especially in ISO 27001, the Information Security Management System. Get certified in 1345. Go get trained and get that documented. Go learn outside of your your known area of expertise. If you're strong in RA, go learn quality. Go see if you can shadow an auditor. If you're only in quality, go shadow a clinical monitor and see the difference in what they do. GMP auditors to do GCP audits, and they think about it from a QMS perspective, but they don't have the nuance to ask the right questions for clinical vendors and suppliers. And that puts us at a disadvantage also. They miss things that a clinical expert might do. So try to build in your QMS processes and your QA processes, internal audits, audits of vendors. Bring your subject matter experts from your cross-functional team into that process and have them be reviewers and learn from each other what you both need to be more successful. I would do that, and then I would learn, honestly, I would learn AI, because that's coming. It's going to be part of our world. So if you haven't started learning it, do it now.
Yeah, I'm just going to just kind of emphasize a few things you said, because I think that's a really good point. And if anybody has questions about where you should go to get that ISO 1345 lead auditor certification, feel free to reach out to me or Sarah or Karendeep. I'm not sure if all of us are that, but when I obtained mine, I had a great experience. So I have a few different people to recommend for different things if you're depending on what you're pursuing. The other thing I'd say though is actually that's all I'll say for now. Karendeep, what about you? Do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, so again, it is if you work in quality and regulatory, regardless of whether you're a consultant or an employee, you work in a company, it's a consistent learning curve. The FDA is always releasing different documents. The MDCG is always releasing different documents. So that's something you have to do in the background. It's important that you set a bit of time to go out and learning different things as well. And in terms of future-proofing yourself in the industry, as Sarah says as well, it's maybe go out and get qualifications, go out and get that lead auditor qualification, go out and get MDR practitioner, etc. And then I'm going to sound slightly controversial, as I sometimes do. It's kind of like I did my lead auditor certification after having sat in and led so many different audits. But so many companies were hell-bent on me having this qualification. And I would always argue back with these companies. It's like, do you want someone who sat in multiple different audits, or do you just want someone with the certification? So sometimes, sadly, in this industry, some companies just want to see that certification, but what the ISO 13485 standard says, it uses the word competent, but that's such a loose term. How do you prove competency? Is that a certificate? Is that work experience? Competency is such a loose term. So I really think if you want to future-proof your industry and you've got the time and resources, go out and get these qualifications. It may not necessarily be that you need them, but it's going to help you stand out in the market.
Great points. And I know what I was going to say after. Actually, it's hard to argue with that. This is so good. That is so good. What Sarah said about AI, I think is important to kind of emphasize as well. Learning AI is more than getting it to write for you. It is potentially analyzing things for you and integrating it to other systems so that it immediately has a flow of information to change. For example, the 19 process that she was talking about, there's a lot of integration that can be done through AI where you have no data loss. And so those are things that I think I'd recommend. There's lots of use cases outside the write my LinkedIn post for me that a lot of people are utilizing. So yeah, just thought I'd throw that out there. And I don't know if you have any specific situations. I'm sure both of you,
Yeah, I was going to just tag on, AI sounds fantastic, and it's super interesting, and I'm in the thick of it. So it's but it's also really important to call BS when you see it. AI is an algorithm, so it depends what data set it was trained on. If it was trained on garbage, such as they were training AI how to talk about relationships for mental health applications, but they use Snapchat, which is a lot of angsty teenagers talking about their first relationships. So that's, we have to look at what data set was this trained on? Were the appropriate guardrails put in place? Were the hallucinations of AI checked so that it's an appropriate analysis, and never make sure, do the gut check, do the logic check. Does this really make sense? And, and then go try to validate it and see how they built their application on top of a platform and how they're managing all of that change control. So AI is coming. You need to know how it works, and you need to know what things to look out for, and you need to know what metrics to put in place. But you got to keep your humans to oversee that AI as a supplemental tool to help you with compliance.
Yeah. I actually think that's such a good point. Rashid actually asked, if I'm saying your name correctly, apologies if not, what does learning AI mean? And it's true, it's a subjective thought. He says there's a whole degree program for AI, so that's really out of the question. Absolutely, but it's just like, in my mind, it's like learning about how to use electricity. You don't have to know V equals IR or P equals IV, just those equations that I've not been able to shake since mechanical engineering school, but you do need to understand, as a general rule, what are you doing when you use AI? In my mind, what I'm doing is I'm using an intern with a PhD. That intern with his PhD may or may not know what I'm trying to accomplish. I assume they're very intelligent, but they're still an intern. And so that's the way I look at that. And that's just my simplistic way of summarizing what Sarah said so much more eloquently. Okay, Ryan asks, what is the maturity of use of AI in QMSs? Do you think quality and regulatory roles are at risk from AI implementation? Please give some examples from Greenlight Guru's AI implementation. And I could touch on the last part there, but I don't know if you want to, Karen Deep or Sarah, want to volunteer for any or all of this question.
Karen Deep,
AI is definitely at the baby stages. Yeah, sure, Sarah, thank you. AI is definitely at the baby stages when it comes to this sort of thing. So, I think AI can be used for a lot of things like, admin perspective. So, going from like version 1 or version 2 to an SOP, or maybe changes in standards, etc. But the only issue with AI, again, just like what Sarah touched on too, it's all dependent on the person who's built the AI. What language model has it been built on? Who's the person that programmed it? And we need to realize tools like ChatGPT are just generic and using information on the internet, which is not always correct. So, do we have an AI that's very quality and regulatory orientated? Yes, of course, you can put standards into AI. You can put all these different things in there. But I think at this moment in time, AI can be used for a lot of the admin tasks, but a lot of the doing bit, the expert part, we still need quality and regulatory consultants because, again, call it a beauty or call it the opposite of it. But, unlike drugs, when it comes to medical devices, it's very much a gray area. And that's where the quality and regulatory expertise is required. And it's in those situations where I feel as though the AI will fall apart. So the AI very much can get rid of the boring admin everyday tasks, things like data collection. Post-market surveillance is also a wonderful thing as well. If you're manually going onto the FDA MORE database or any of the other databases out there to do your post-market surveillance, you can use AI tools to grab that data for you. But there still needs to be a quality and regulatory expert at the other end to sit down, read through that data, and then make use of it. So I think AI can be great as a data collection tool and to maybe get rid of some of that boring admin stuff. But the quality and regulatory person is still needed there. That's all it is, the AI. And again, it goes down to the same as the concept of a software as a medical device. AI at this moment in time, whether that's working in a medical device or quality and regulatory, is a wonderful assistance tool, but not very good at taking over the task completely.
I would echo that. And,
Sarah, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you. And sorry about the delay again on the line. So learning AI, I play around with each of the Claude, GPT, Bard. I play around with each of the systems. I'm learning that if I don't ask my question, it'll say like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't understand." Like, yeah, you're right, you didn't. So I still have a job. Thank you very much. So, joking aside. Do I think AI is going to replace some quality assurance big group personnel within the next couple of years? I do. I really do. But I think that executives need to be very aware. It is not time yet to do that because there's a lot more that needs to be built in as guardrails and accuracy checkers and logic checkers and to stop the hallucination. Just because AI says this is what it is doesn't necessarily mean that's true yet. We have not validated that yet. So be aware. It's a helpful, interesting tool. And yes, I appreciate the administrative tasks, but I do think depending on how it's trained, what the guardrails are, what the oversight is, who trained it on what model, there is real potential there to take over quite a few quality assurance tasks and automate those things. So could there be a reduction in headcount? I'm seeing the trend as yes, not yet, not right now. Please don't do it now. But in the future, within the next couple of years, I'm going to say yes.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I'll just kind of touch on the last part with examples from Greenlee Gru's AI implementation. So there's been a different evolving thing. We actually were far ahead of the curve. It was prior to far enough that it wasn't necessarily adopted by a lot of people. So we started out there several years ago. We had an AI implementation. So if you updated one document, it would suggest all of these other documents that you should update as well. So if you're going to update, obviously, if you have a quality manual, that could potentially trickle out to a lot of other places that need to be updated as well. So it would make those suggestions. Some of those things are no longer in place just because of a lack of adoption or utilization or a fear of using AI in the software. So if there are questions or if you have thoughts about different things that should be there or you'd like to see there, I'd love to hear those things. And I know there's lots of different possibilities and lots of things coming. For example, one of a great use cases is a RIM system. And so your regulatory intelligence management, knowing when all of the different standards that your product are associated with are being updated, you might need to know that. So there's lots of different things coming, but I do think this industry has been a little bit slower to adopt than others, which means, to Karen Deep's point, that we're in the baby steps. As a general rule across the world, I think we're in the baby steps, but in the medical device industry, I think even more so. If you become a proficient user of AI, you'll be even further ahead of the curve than even other industries. So I'll just throw that out there. Take it or leave it. I think we already talked about, let's see, there was some questions about advice for different levels of, and maybe this is one worth talking about. Madhavi asked, would you have any advice for regulatory affairs, entry-level employees to get experience in the field to make them more competitive? Maybe we can expand this just to, we already gave that advice to a certain degree, so I don't, but this is one of the higher voted questions. So if you have any additional advice, we can kind of address that.
You know,
Sarah,
I do have an example.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. When I was at Corporate Medtronic in corporate clinical affairs, I took all of the 483s and warning letters that were all historical, and I put them in, I analyzed them manually. We didn't have AI back then, right? Showing my age here. But I used keywords and I used trends, and I found 10 key trends that we ended up making new policies about. So if you're in a large company, read through your company's 483s, read through those warning letters, read through the ones on the FDA website. Start seeing the trends for yourself. They sign up for those warning letter signals, those alerts every week, and read through and understand they're naming quality assurance people by name in those warning letters now. And they're saying, you need an independent quality consultant. So start learning the things that FDA and EMA and other regulatory bodies are finding in these audits. And
Great point. Karen Deep, what about you?
Yeah, so my view here is kind of, experience always trumps certifications and courses. So my view here is go out and try to get that experience, go out and work in the wide range of things. And as Sarah's touched on to as well, the future of medical devices is pretty much AI, software, medical device, integrations, etc. Now, of course, 80 to 90% of your devices are your traditional devices. But then that also means that there's quite a big gap in the market of people that understand the software medical device space, understand AI, understand machine learning. Because again, you may be a quality and regulatory expert who understands the FDA, EU MDR, TGA, etc. But the benefit that you can have is if you understand AI and know exactly how that algorithm is working, know exactly how that software is working, you are really going to stand out amongst the other quality and regulatory people that get the regulations. But if you know the ins and outs of that device, because a physical device is quite obvious, you can open it out, you can see the components in there. But anyone that can understand AI algorithms, understand that decision-making progress, that will really push you in front of the market compared to other people in this space.
mm-hmm.
Great piece of advice. I love that. I'm going to make that our last question because we are kind of coming up against the time, and you all have hung in there really well with us. So we're really appreciate it. Both of you, Sarah and Karen Deep. I know we've talked a lot. We've thought a lot. I will say there were a few questions about the FDA cutbacks, and I'm gonna say two things real quick. So number one, Sarah and I recorded a podcast on that recently. She's very close to a lot of those things, being the co-chair for the AMI Working Group 4. So she has a little bit of intel there. So we did a podcast on that. In addition to that, so keep an eye out for that. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, I host the Global Medical Device Podcast. So we talk about a lot of different things. That's one of those topics that we covered. I'll also say Karen Deep and I also recently recorded a podcast. So keep an eye out for his if you want to learn more about his expertise. We talked about some of the reimbursement strategies globally if you're interested in learning about that. That aside, we are going to be doing another webinar on April 10th on the FDA cutback. So if you're interested in being a part of that or learning more about that, feel free to email us or wait for that email. We should be sending you some more information. That is all I have, though. I'd like to thank everyone for being a part of this webinar and really appreciate it. If you want, in the comments, I'd love to see your thoughts on or as you get the report. Let's use the report because I don't have a survey set up. What you might like to hear about in the future. Either reach out to Sarah, Karen Deep, myself. I'd love to hear what would you like to hear us talk about in the future, and we'll try to cover those questions that you might have. Yeah. Any last thoughts, Sarah or Karen Deep?
No, I was just going to say thank you so much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you both, and the questions have been great from the audience as well. There's lots to learn, so it's nice to have this community to share information together.
Thank you. Karen Deep, what about you?
Yeah, Etienne, of course, it's always a pleasure to come back, so thank you very much for that. But I suppose that the last piece of advice I'll probably be leaving the audience with here is, it's very clear is how companies think pre-commercial, and once they go commercial, it's quite different. So my view here is the earlier you start, the better off you can be, and the more success that you'll have. So my view here is start doing it from the start. Don't delay these sort of things.
Awesome. Thank you all. We'll let you get back to it, and we'll see you all next time. Take care.
Okay.
It's a little bit complicated, but there's a button on the bottom that says leave stage. So if you do that, that'll get you to the backstage. All right.